Happy Monday and welcome to your Mental Health Mini. This week's guest is Dr. Emily Weinstein, and we are discussing the psychology behind some of the most dangerous aspects of social media, such as cognitive distortions, comparisons, and more.
We show up to whatever technologies we're using with all of our strengths and vulnerabilities. There are things that are really hard about phones, and there are things that are hard for whole groups of people, and there are things that are hard for many, if not all of us, around the way technologies are designed. There are some really specific design features of technology that can amplify the experience because you literally can see like, oh, this message was opened and the person read it and they haven't responded. That can just pull you into this kind of anxious thinking spiral. Like you see that someone's read your message and they haven't responded and you're like, should I not have said that? Are they mad at me? Was that not funny? Like, am I an idiot? Whatever your kind of like your own brand of the anxious thinking spiral looks like. And actually, when you listen to what people describe, you're like, oh, this is really familiar for most people, I think, who have a psych background, in that it sounds a lot like familiar cognitive distortions. Like that whole process of going like, oh, they didn't respond, they must be mad at me, they must think I'm an idiot. That is a pretty classic example or version of mind reading, which is a cognitive distortion that is super well studied and widely discussed, where we just think we know what someone else is thinking about us. We assume that it's bad. We give it sort of a whole negative spin. And while tech did not create these sorts of distortions, one of the things that we hear when we really listen to teens is that there are a lot of ways that tech is designed that make social media in particular so ripe for these kinds of distortions.
Yeah.
And when we start talking about them, I think that takes some of the power out of them, but also connecting the dots to, oh, like this sounds like a cognitive distortion. And it is helpful if we can name them, and it is helpful if we can acknowledge them and you have language to talk about them. And someone else might be having those same experiences or they might not. And so creating enough space for that in our conversations, which we do with so many other parts of teens' lives, but for some reason, not consistently with tech. I think tech is also just so obviously designed to optimize for our attention. So we're living in an attention economy, not an agency economy, not a well-being economy. So the tech companies are, right, their entire revenue model is based off of being able to capture and hold and retain our attention, keep us scrolling or coming back for more, logging in every day. And so we actually have this design pull that can make it really hard for us to act in our own best interests in some of these moments. And one of the things I've been really interested in is, I think when we look across the sort of social media research, one of the things that feels to me like a fairly clear sort of finding is around social comparison. And specifically when we do the sort of upward comparisons that make us feel like, ugh, that person, everyone is better than me. And social media is really, right, it's ripe for that in a lot of ways. It can feel like there's so much, there is a lot of doom and gloom, absolutely like doom scrolling content. And there is a lot of content that can evoke comparison. So you have this sort of almost like this emotional whiplash of going from this really upsetting, disturbing content that makes you feel really sad to this content that makes you feel sort of potentially sad in another way. And a couple of really interesting things about comparison, I think, are worth us just acknowledging and knowing. So one is that just dispositionally, some of us are more inclined to comparison than others, right? So I might be someone who just tends to compare myself more than you are. Also, developmentally, there are periods, and adolescence is one of them, when we're sort of more inclined in that direction. Like we're doing more comparisons as we're figuring out who we are and how we fit into the social world. So we're kind of more vulnerable to doing that sort of thinking anyway. Transitions can also be another time when we get more vulnerable to comparisons because we're sort of assessing so much new information. And the transition to college is a huge transition. So in a lot of ways, I actually think that the transition to college is a moment when we should absolutely expect that we're going to be more vulnerable to go into that sort of comparison quicksand trap where we start feeling like, oh, like everyone's happier than me, or everyone's having better lives, or I'm doing this wrong. I'm doing this transition wrong. And social media can give us what feels like a lot of data to support that evidence. But of course, it's completely flawed data. So I think being able to also just know that. And for me, it means like knowing when I am in a period for myself, when I'm just a little more vulnerable for whatever reason to the kinds of comparisons that social media is going to enable. And sometimes that might be LinkedIn and sometimes it might be Instagram, right? And so one of the kind of areas of mindfulness that I think can really serve us well is tuning into for ourselves. A, noticing when we're going down that sort of comparison trap, but B, starting to notice, oh, I'm like in a period where I am doing more of that kind of thinking on this particular platform. And I need to know that. And I need to be a little more intentional. I need to maybe like not do that right before bed when I'm tired. So I'm already more inclined to go down
Yeah.
that kind of more vulnerable way of thinking or whatever it is. And it doesn't mean that you never turn to your phone in those moments. But if you do find that you need a mindless distraction, maybe it's like the New York Times game app instead of
Yes.
your LinkedIn feed.
If you enjoyed this mental health mini, you can listen to the full episode. It is episode 218 featuring Dr. Emily Weinstein. A link to the full episode is in the show notes. And as always, make sure to leave a review, subscribe, share with a friend or family member, and follow @She Persisted Podcast. Thanks for listening.